Good afternoon mga misyonaryo na kasaysayan from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. This is BANTAY HISTORYA, presenting historical information that tells only the truth as we step back in time to unravel the stories that shape the present. Today is May 2, a brand new day for a new scope of knowledge on the echoes of the past. Today's story highlights historic differences between governance in prehistoric Philippines and the modern times. The pre-Hispanic barangay government consisted of 30 to 100 families ruled by a datu or raja, who acted as a king. The social structure had three classes: the maharlika or nobles, the timawa or the free laborers, and the alipin or the slaves, who were further divided into namamahay, who were given certain rights, and the sagigilid, who were owned by masters. Laws were created by the datus, with advice from elders to maintain peace and order. The Sultanate of Sulu was established in the 15th century, followed by the Sultanate of Maguindanao in the 16th century. With interesting historical facts on the Philippine government under the Spanish colonization period, live from the Museo de la Historia de Filipinas, Paula.
The advent of colonization can be traced back into 1521 with the arrival of Spain through Ferdinand Magellan's expedition.
Soon after, the Philippines was a crown colony of the Spain through Mexico from 1565 to 1821. As such, Spain ruled with the help of the Council of the Indies, created in 1524, which was an overseas ministry governing the colonies of Spain. The head of the council was the Viceroy of Mexico. Las leyes de Indias were the laws that Spain implemented in the colony. The Governor-General was executive chief appointed by the Spanish monarchy, who was also legislative powers, and the Royal Audiencia served as Supreme Court. The first government system based on land partition was the encomienda. After Mexico declared its independence in 1821, La Isla Filipina was directly ruled by Spain until 1898.
Through the period of colonization, the Patronato Real was provided for the Union of States and Church, where the Church was placed under the power of Spain for making the friars politically powerful, or what is referred as fealocracy.
The Spanish government controlled the islands through a centralized system, relying heavily on the Catholic Church to maintain order and influence local populations. In the local government, high political powers, such as the alcalde-mayor of the pacified province, were reserved only to Spaniards.
Spanish rule left a lasting impact on the Philippine culture, language, and political structures, shaping the country's future after independence. Back to you, Angelica.
Truly mga misyonaryo ng kasaysayan, the legacy of Spanish colonization continues to be seen in Filipino traditions, architectures, and legal systems, reflecting both on the hardships and cultural exchanges during this period. Live from Studio 2, let's look back on the events in the Philippine government during the Philippine Revolution. PB?
The Filipinos from the beginning of colonial oppression had always found themselves in defiance and struggle. The Filipino people's call for freedom sparked more than 100 rebellions, with notable heroes emerging, such as Raja Sulaiman, Diego and Gabriela Silang, Tagohoy, and Emano Pule. For more details, live from the Kawit Historical Museum, let's hear from Emerald.
In January 1872, the failed attempt of the Cavite Mutiny against the government resulted in a case of rebellion against three secular priests: Father Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. They were convicted and were executed. The disappointment of the Ilustrados in Europe over the fate of the Gambursa pushed for the formation of the propaganda movement, an action for reforms.
Emerald, for how long did this propaganda last? And did it serve its purpose in terms of effectiveness?
The propaganda was active for years and was most effective during the period of Del Pilar and Jaina and Rizal. The Nolami Tangere, Rizal's first novel, was considered as the most powerful weapon the propaganda ever had against Spain. However, internal disunity within the movement led Rizal to resign his leadership and form the Liga Filipina. Unfortunately, his political efforts were interrupted when he was exiled to Dapitan.
With the disruption of the civic association by Rizal, how did the revolution against the Spanish regime continue?
There is the Katipunan, otherwise known as the Kagalang-galangan, Kataas-taasang Katipunan ng mga Anak ng Bayan, or KKK, led by Supremo Andres Bonifacio. It was formed as a secret society aiming to overthrow Spanish rule. On August 26, 1896, in Pugadlawin, Balintawak, the Katipunan declared the separation from Spain, igniting the nationwide revolution. The execution of Dr. Jose Rizal on December 30, 1896, drew more Filipinos to join the fight for independence. With the birth of the Katipunan, joining us is Ella for further information. Ella?
To strengthen the Katipunan, Bonifacio traveled to Cavite, where the Magdiwa and Magdalena factions fought the Spanish. The Tejeros Assembly led to the creation of the first revolutionary government with General Emilio Aguinaldo as president. In 1897, Aguinaldo formed the Biak-na-Bato Republic and a truce was signed with Spain through the Pact of Biak-na-Bato. The pact promised peace in Aguinaldo's exile in exchange for 400,000 pesos, but the revolution continued as many leaders refused to surrender.
After what has happened with Aguinaldo's exile, how did Aguinaldo respond? Was there any intention to come back to the Philippines and reassess the evolution?
The struggle for Philippine independence continued despite the truce. Aguinaldo, exiled in Hong Kong, saw the start of the Spanish-American War and formed a fragile alliance with the U.S. through the Commodore George Dew. On May 1, 1898, the Battle of Manila Bay destroyed the Spanish fleet, enabling Aguinaldo to return to Cavite, where the Americans entered Manila. Aguinaldo established a dictatorial government supported by his cabinet, and the Philippine Army grew stronger and pushed Spanish forces out of the provinces from southern Tagalog to the Visayan Islands.
Does this confirm the victory of the Philippine revolutionaries' fight for freedom against the Spanish colonization?
Because the culmination of Filipino sacrifices came on June 12, 1898, when Aguinaldo proclaimed the independence of the Philippines at his residence in Kawit, Cavite, again interpreted as one of the victories of the Katipunan. The national flag was raised and the Marcha Nacional Filipina was played, signaling the birth of the Philippine Republic. Emerald?
The next day, the second revolutionary government was formed to stabilize the country and seek U.S. recognition as a democratic state, with Premier Apolinario Mabini guiding the transition. On August 13, 1898, the fall of Manila occurred when Spanish Governor-General Fermin Jotens surrendered to the Americans instead of the Filipinos. This led to the establishment of the U.S. military government on August 14 under President William McKinley's order. General Wesley Merritt became the first U.S. military governor, followed by General Elwell Otis and General Arthur MacArthur.
With this information, it can be concluded that these last events are what Apolinario Mabini described to be the premature independence that the Philippine revolutionaries experienced. Back to you, Phoebe.
Despite the change in control, the fight for true independence persisted. Filipinos not only battled Spanish rule but also faced the growing presence of American colonial power. The dream of a free Philippines endured even as new challenges arose. Now, for more on the First Republic and the Philippine-American War, here's news anchor Megan.
The fight for Philippine independence reached a significant moment in 1898 as the country transitioned from revolution to the formation of the First Republic and eventually found itself at conflict with the rising power of the United States. For this report, live from the historic Presbyterian Church in Malolos, Bulacan, Alexandra.
On September 15, 1898, the Malolos Congress was inaugurated at the historic Presbyterian Church in Malolos, Bulacan. This Congress' first task was to draft a constitution that would form the foundation of the First Republic. After extensive debates, the Malolos Constitution, drafted by Felipe Calderon, was approved by the Congress on November 29, 1898. President Emilio Aguinaldo finally approved the Constitution on January 21, 1899, after much deliberation. However, international events were unfolding that would complicate the Philippines' quest for independence. On December 10, 1898, the Treaty of Paris was signed between Spain and the United States. As part of the treaty, Spain ceded the Philippines along with Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States in exchange for $20 million. Despite Aguinaldo's effort to send Felipe Agoncillo as the Philippine emissary to insist on the recognition of the Philippine independence, the United States and Spain did not acknowledge the country's sovereignty. On February 4, 1899, an incident at San Juan Bridge ignited the Philippine-American War, leading to a series of defeats for the Filipino forces. The war ended with the capture of Aguinaldo in Palanan, Isabela, effectively making the fall of the Republic. Back to you, Megan.
Despite facing overwhelming challenges, the struggle for freedom during this time laid the foundation for the nation we know today. While the war marked a painful chapter in Philippine history, it also highlighted the unyielding spirit of the Filipino people, determined to shape their own future. The lessons from this era remind us of the value of liberty and the sacrifices made to protect it, lessons that continue to inspire generations. To discuss the American occupation in the Philippines, let's welcome news anchor Sandara together with the renowned historian Dr. Quaresma.
Another day, another kaalaman mga kamisyonary ng kasaysayan. Join as we explore on the American occupation. Let's welcome Dr. Riza Quaresma.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here.
Well, let's get started. On July 4, 1901, after Emilio Aguinaldo was captured, the U.S. started a civil government in the Philippines. William Howard Taft became the first civil governor. Why was this important?
Um, it was a big moment because it meant the Philippines was shifting from military rule to civil rule. But even though the US set up a new government, many parts of the country still resisted. For example, places like Southern Luzon were still under military control until 1902. Northern Luzon stayed under military rule until 1905, after Macario Sakay was executed.
Oh, so it wasn't an easy change?
No, not at all. In fact, it took years before places like Mindanao, where Muslim groups were resisting, were fully under civil government. It wasn't until 1914 that they finally came under control.
But the Philippine Organic Act of 1902 helped things moving, right?
Yes, that was important. It led to the creation of Philippine Assembly, where Filipinos were elected to be part of the government. This assembly worked with the Philippine Commission, which was made up of American officials. Early leaders like Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Quezon were key in this new government.
That's right. Then, under Governor Francis Burton Harrison, more Filipinos were given government jobs, right?
Exactly. By the end of Harrison's time as a governor, Filipinos were running most of the government. This was a major step toward self-rule. The Jones Law, passed in 1916, gave Filipinos chance to work toward independence.
But there were still challenges. Leonard Wood took over as governor, and he wasn't popular with Filipinos, right?
Yes, that's right. Leonard Wood's policies made him very unpopular, especially with Filipino leaders. In 1923, many of his cabinet members resigned because they disagreed with him. This event is called the cabinet crisis.
Then, in 1931, there was the Osrocks Mission. It helped get the Hair House Cutting Act, which was a step toward independence. But it wasn't the end of the story, was it?
No, it wasn't. The Hair House Cutting Act was rejected by Senate President Manuel Quezon. He felt it didn't give the Philippines enough freedom. So he worked on a new law, the Tidings-McDuffie Act, which finally gave the Philippines a clear plan for independence.
So there were many setbacks. These steps helped lead to the Philippines becoming fully independent in 1946.
Yes, exactly. It was a long road, but Filipino leaders worked hard for the country's freedom.
Dr. Quaresma, thank you so much for explaining this part of the Philippine history. It's amazing to see how much the Filipino people fought for their freedom.
Thank you for having me, mga komisyonero ng kasaysayan.
Back to you, Megan.
It's clear that this period was marked by both conflict and transformation. While it brought significant changes to the country, it also sparked a long and hard-fought struggle for independence. For the birth of the Philippine Commonwealth, again, let's welcome news reporter Ella.
We look back at the key moment in Philippine history, the creation of the 1935 Constitution and the beginning of the Commonwealth government. On July 10, 1934, the Philippine legislature elected representatives to the Constitutional Convention. Their job was to draft a new constitution for the country, laying the groundwork for self-governance. The presidential election of 1935 made Manuel L. Quezon as the first Commonwealth president and Sergio Osmeña as the vice president. Under the 1935 Constitution, national defense was the priority of the government. Under the Commonwealth, new government offices were created, new cities were created, women were allowed to vote, and the Filipino, based on Tagalog, became the national language. Back to Studio 1, Angelica.
To tackle on the occurrences of the Philippine government during the World War II, let's hear from Jana, live at Dambana, Valenzuela City.
Yes, Angelica, allow me to ask if there is a kamisyonario ng kasaysayan here at Dambana who is willing to share their knowledge about the state of Philippines during World War II. A pleasant afternoon, miss. I am a news reporter, Jana Forlales, for Bantay Historia, and would you like to be on the show for today?
Yes, I'm one of your avid viewers. What's this about?
Are you knowledgeable about the Philippine governments during the World War II?
Yes, I know Philippines.
Then,
Let's start with December 8, 1941. The day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan began its invasion of the Philippines. Manila fell just weeks later on January 2, 1942. Can you tell us about the government that was set up during this period?
Certainly, after Manila fell, the Japanese established the Philippine Executive Commission headed by George Vargas. This marked the start of their military administration in the country. The Filipinos were put under Japanese rule, though resistance began almost immediately.
Right. And after the fall of Bataan, we saw the tragic Bataan Death March, where thousands of Filipinos and American soldiers were forced to march to a prison camp. About 70,000 soldiers died. How did the resistance continue during this time?
Despite the heavy losses, guerrilla resistance group led by people like Manuel Rojas and Ramon Magsaysay continued to fight against the Japanese occupation. The Filipino spirit of resistance never wavered.
Then, in 1943, the Japanese promised independence to the Philippines. What did this mean for the country?
Yes, on May 5, 1943, Japan's Premier Hideki Tojo promised independence. As a result, the Philippines Preparatory Commission was formed to draft a consultation. On September 4, 1943, the Philippine Constitution was completed and ratified, and on September 25, 1943, Jose P. Laurel was elected President of the Second Republic.
but of course, the war wasn't over yet. What happened next?
I forgot what happened next.
Oh, no worries. You did great. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, glad to be here.
In 1944, the tide of war turned. Led by General MacArthur, American forces landed in Leyte on October 20. triggering the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in the history. After intense fighting, the Allies secured a decisive victory. In 1945, the liberation of Philippines began. On January 5, MacArthur landed in Lingayen, and by February, Manila was retaken. Despite heavy destruction, the Commonwealth government was restored.
We'll never forget the courage and resilience shown by the Filipino people during these trying times. Back to you, Angelica.
The path was not easy, but through courage and determination, the Philippines achieved its independence and established a democratic government that continues to evolve. The journey of creating and amending constitutions reflects the country's commitment to justice, freedom, and progress. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I am Angelica Garcia,